Hello and welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art, and today we are continuing our deep dive into Dickens, his book Great Expectations, chapters 34 through 37. We get into some pretty significant chapters here as we're getting closer to the end of book 2. And from what we've read in this section, I think we can count on the end of book 2 being something of a pretty major cliffhanger. I don't remember exactly how the second book ends, but we'll all find out together, I guess. I'm so grateful for you all to be reading along with me again. I'd love to hear your comments, and I'll interact with you below on this video or on our Voxer channel. Links are in the show notes. I don't really have a lot of announcements to begin with today, other than I hope you're enjoying it. Here in a couple of weeks, we'll be taking a week off after we finish book 2 and before we pick up on book 3. So that will hopefully give some of you a chance to catch up if you're behind on the reading or want to get caught up on videos. And then going into part 3, I would love to have more of you on. Maybe even if you're not caught up, but you want to be on, we can have you. I think I could probably arrange something where we could have you on. What I think might be fun to do is have a group, kind of a group meeting where we talk about the parts we have read and see what our thoughts are up till this point before we go on to the third portion of the book. If that's something that you'd be interested in, talking about a past chapter, that might be something we can arrange for our off week and have different sections. We just kind of do an overview of different sections with some of you. Because I know not all of you are keeping up with the pace, and that's fine. Don't feel stressed or pressured. This is meant to be fun. We might do something like that. All right. So without any further ado, let's dive into Dickens as we look at chapters 34 and 35. First of all, part 21 of Great Expectations. So we find Pip possibly regretting that he was even given those expectations. I think we've seen this coming. He says at the beginning of chapter 34, he said, "I used to think with weariness on my spirits that I should have been happier and better if I had never seen Miss Havisham's face and had risen to manhood content to be partners with Joe in the honest old forge." He's talking about how, maybe as I think about this, it would have been better if I had just been left in the forge. And that's, those are some interesting thoughts he's having now compared to where we have seen him. We've been worried about him being spoiled by the riches and not becoming the best version of himself. He continues to go into debt, and he's pulling poor Herbert Pocket into debt with him as well. I love their comical attempts here to deal with their debt. Pip tells Herbert, "Hey, we got to look into our affairs." So they get all their debt together. They stack it in neat little piles. They get it organized. They figure it out. We just got to meet it head on. But then that's about all they do, is they just organize it. And I suppose it's better than completely ignoring it. It's like college kids out in the real world for the first time, and they didn't realize that all that credit card debt they racked up actually has to be paid off at some point. And they're going to end up paying back more than what they first originally borrowed. I don't know. I kind of found this chapter amusing that, that they're trying to figure this out and all they're doing is just organizing a mess. And he says, "We always derived profound satisfaction from making an appointment for this purpose, to organize their debt. I always thought this was business. This was the way to confront the thing. This was the way to take the foe by the throat." And I know Herbert thought so too. When he's not sure about a bill amount, Pip tells him, well, just estimate, round it up, whatever. And Herbert says, "Really, your business powers are very remarkable." And, I think, well, are they though? Are they though? It's pretty sad, to be honest. So just really a short chapter. I found kind of comical, a nice filler chapter. But one that, is a little easier to understand than the Shakespeare chapter was. But then chapter 34 ends with a heartbreak that is almost in contradiction with the humor of this chapter. And it says that he received a letter from Trabb and Company, and its contents were simply that I was an honored sir, and that they begged to inform me that Mrs. J. Gargery had departed this life on Monday last at 20 minutes past 6 in the evening, and that my attendance was requested at the interment on Monday next at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we get the news that Mrs. Joe Gargery has shuffled off this mortal coil. I think that leaves Pip with a bundle of confusing emotions, as we find out. So he's returning home again for the funeral. And so we come to chapter 35, and we find that he is, I think, a bit haunted by her death. He says, "It was the first time that a grave had opened in my road of life, and the gap it made in the smooth ground was wonderful. The figure of my sister in her chair by the kitchen fire haunted me night and day. That the place could possibly be without her was something my mind seemed unable to compass. And whereas she had seldom or never been in my thoughts of late, I had now the strangest ideas that she was coming towards me in the street, or that she would presently knock at the door. In my rooms, too, with which she had never been at all associated, there was at once the blankness of death and a perpetual suggestion of the sound of her voice or the turn of her face or figure, as if she were still alive and had been often there." So he's shocked. He's grieving. He's having all these emotions. And now, he said, before I'd hardly ever thought of her, but now I keep thinking about her, and keep thinking I hear her, and keep thinking I see her. Maybe he's feeling a bit guilty for not keeping better connection with his family. When people are abused or mistreated by others, they might even be a person that we care about, or at least should care about, but because of that relationship is strained, it really does leave feelings of mixed emotions, and often we don't know how to feel. And I think Pip is maybe feeling that way. This is his sister. She raised him. She took care of him. She brought him in. She and Joe provided a family, a home for him, but she was also neglectful, emotionally abusive and manipulative, perhaps physically abusive at times, and not always a good person to be around. And we know, that she has had her share of heartaches and disappointments in life, and we understand that. But I can't help but realize that Pip is having mixed feelings. And then we get a touching reunion of Pip and Joe, where Pip comes back to the forge, and he sees it all decorated for a funeral, and black stuff everywhere, and people dressed in mourning and all this. And he sees Joe sitting forlornly at the table, and he comes up and said, "When I bent down and said to him, 'Dear Joe, how are you?' he said, 'Pip, old chap, you knowed her when she were a fine figure of a,' and clasped my hand and said no more." And I just find that really sweet. Joe is legitimately grieved, I think. We have wondered, how could Joe marry a woman like this? But in spite of whatever faults their relationship might have had, I think Joe genuinely cared for her and took his responsibility as a husband very seriously. And that just continues to add to his character of what a good man Joe is. And he's showing genuine grief, which is in contrast, I think, to the funeral, which I found the whole description of the funeral to be mildly comic. A lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of Mr. Pumblechook is being obnoxious as always. He's continuing to allude to taking credit for giving Pip his expectations. But through all of this, I think Joe is demonstrating genuine grief. He says this, he takes pride in deciding to stay the night at the forge rather than in the hotel. He says, Joe was very much pleased by my asking if I might sleep in my own little room, and I was pleased too, for I felt that I had done rather a great thing in making the request. When the shadow of evening were closing in, I took an opportunity of getting into the garden with Biddy for a little talk. "Biddy," said I think you might have written to me about these sad matters." "Do you, Mr. Pip?" said Biddy. I should have written if I had thought that. Don't suppose I mean to be unkind, Biddy, when I say I consider that you ought to have thought that. Do you, Mr. Pip? And then Pip also asks her, how are you going to live? Do you need money? Those kinds of things, which I think Biddy takes a little bit of offense at. That she has been perfectly capable, functioning perfectly fine on her own without Pip's help. Up till this point, she's going to be able to continue to do that. Thank you very much. And I love that little spirit of independence we get from her. Female characters, even at times, even in some of Dickens' earlier work especially, they aren't always portrayed like we'd like them to be. and I love that she was kind of just saying, no, I'll be fine. She doesn't really want a lot to do with Pip right now because of the way he has chosen to live and the way he is acting. We do get an interesting description of Mrs. Joe's final words. She comes to Joe, she puts her arms around his neck, and it says, and she laid her head down on his shoulder, quite content and satisfied. And so she presently said, Joe again, and once pardon, and once Pip. And so she never lifted her head up any more, and it was just an hour later when we laid it down on her own bed because we found she was gone. What do you think she was asking pardon for? Was she asking pardon from Pip? From Pip and Joe? I think in the end, she was seeking forgiveness, which is tragic, but oddly beautiful too. And so hopefully she found some modicum of peace before she passed. And then Biddy continues to be the conscience, I think, that Pip needs, and the reminder that Pip needs. She says this about Joe as they're talking. She says, or Pip records, by degrees she led me into more temperate talk, and she told me how Joe loved me, and how Joe never complained of anything. She didn't say of me she had no need. I knew what she meant. But ever did his duty in his way of life with a strong hand, a quiet tongue, and a gentle heart. And I love that description. That describes Joe perfectly, right? He had a strong hand, a quiet tongue, and a gentle heart. I love that contrast of strength with gentleness. I think what everyone should strive for, to be honest, not just men, but everyone. Striving to be strong, but gentle. And it's a balancing act. It's not always done easily. What a great man Joe is. And so Pip declares that, he says, I am not going to leave poor Joe alone. He's trying to reassure Biddy. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave Joe alone. But Biddy doesn't answer, and Pip takes a little offense at that. And basically, Biddy says, are you quite sure then that you will come to see him often? Asked Biddy, stopping in the narrow garden walk and looking at me under the stars with a clear and honest eye. Ouch. And then later he said, as often as I was restless in the night, and that was every quarter of an hour, I reflected what an unkindness, what an injury, what an injustice Biddy had done me. So he takes offense at that, and yet, knowing full well, as he says later, that he's not going to do it. So maybe he's upset because he knows what she's saying is true. Biddy asks him to forgive her for what she implied, that he wouldn't come and take care of Joe. And here's what he says at the ending of this chapter. Once more, the mists were rising as I walked away. If they disclosed to me, as I suspect they did, that I should not come back, and that Biddy was quite right, all I can say is, they were quite right too. And so sure enough, unfortunately, he is neglecting Joe. And that's how part 21 ends. One thing I read online said that these mists are acting like almost like a crystal ball. At times they will reveal hints of the future, and that's kind of the mechanism that Dickens is employing here with this. And I find that to be really kind of fascinating. So, as Pip looks into the mists and sees hints of the future of his life yet to come, turns out Biddy was right. And that's unfortunate. All right, so we get to chapters 36 and 37, part 22. We find out that it's Pip's birthday. He has now come of age. Herbert has also just recently come of age. They are now 21 years old, and Pip is now going to come into at least part of his expectations. So he receives a letter from Mr. Jaggers and to come to his office, which he does. Mr. Jaggers asks him about his debt. He knows how he's been living. So to make a long story short here, basically, if I understand this right, Pip will now receive £500 now, and then he will receive £125 a quarter. And I guess that's a lot. They seem to act like it was a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot to me. And I know there's, inflation and everything, but even from what I've read about Victorian novels, I don't know, that doesn't really sound like a lot to me. And so I don't know if is there a website or some information I could read that kind of gives the equivalence of pounds to in the 1800s to what it works out to be today. I'd like to read about that and learn a little bit more about this. So really just kind of a brief, a smaller chapter here. Pip asks some questions. Mr. Jaggers invites him to ask questions. Pip asks, "Are you going to name my benefactor?" Jaggers says no. I said rats. And then he continues on, asking a couple of questions about those things, but Jaggers isn't really that forthcoming and won't tell him anything. And then from the sounds of it, Pip will come into complete control of his expectations whenever his benefactor decides to reveal themselves to him. I think he's trying to hint too is Estella part of this deal? And Mr. Jaggers is not saying one way or the other. So on his way out, Pip speaks with Wemmick, and as we find out from the next chapter too, he wants to invest some money anonymously to Herbert to help him get established in business. Because I think, in part, Pip feels guilty about pulling Herbert into so much debt. And so he asks Wemmick's opinion of it, and Wemmick tells him, as a businessman, no, don't do it. He says, I have no advice to give you other than don't do it. You might as well just throw your money off a bridge and be done with it. So, but he hints and alludes at, as a friend, I would have a different answer for you. So he makes plans to come and visit Mr. Wemmick at his castle, which will happen in the next chapter. Mr. Jaggers gets invited home for Pip to celebrate his birthday, and he says this at the end of chapter 36, that it was an uncomfortable consideration on a 21st birthday, that coming of age at all seemed hardly worthwhile in such a guarded and suspicious world as he made of it, Jaggers made of it. He was 1,000 times better informed and cleverer than Wemmick, and yet I would 1,000 times rather have had Wemmick to dinner. And Mr. Jaggers made not me alone intensely melancholy, because, after he was gone, Herbert said of himself, with his eyes fixed on the fire, that he thought he must have committed a felony and forgotten the details of it. He felt so dejected and guilty. So this is the kind of feelings that Mr. Jaggers has on people that even Herbert thought, he made me feel so guilty and everything that I feel like I may have done a crime that I forgot about. That's terrible. All right, so chapter 37 here as we wrap up this section. So they get back to Wemmick's castle, and I'm happy about that because this is a place that I love to be. I don't know why. It's homey, it's quaint, and it's protected, and I like it. Wemmick is not at home, but the aged parent is, and they have an amusing conversation anyway. And so finally, Wemmick returns, and he is in the presence of a girl, a Miss Skiffins, who is wearing a very interesting choice of colors. Well, let me just read this to you. The cut of her dress, from the waist upward, both before and behind, made her figure very like a boy's kite. And I might have pronounced her gown a little too decidedly orange, and her gloves a little too intensely green. But she seemed to be a good sort of fellow, and showed a high regard for the aged. So that's Like, ugh, wow. So this vividly orange dress, intense green gloves. I mean, I don't know. To me, the colors really clash, and maybe they did back then too. So to get to the point of why Pip came, he wants to help Herbert be established in business. Pip wants to take his expectations, his money, and some of it be used to help out Herbert. And I think this is a good thing. This is a good sign. It might be a foolish thing, you know, as Wemmick said, from the business point of view, you might as well just throw your money off a bridge. But honestly, I think this is a good thing and a good sign that Pip is wanting to help someone earnestly. I don't know. Maybe he's doing it out of guilt, but at least he's doing it. And I think it's good. And in fact, I found this interesting that he's basically becoming to Herbert what somebody has been to him. Not as extensive, but he is anonymously wanting to give Herbert some money to help him get started in business. There's a man, they find out a man in town named Cleriker, I think is it how you pronounce that name, wants to expand some of his business. So he's helping Herbert to be a part of that. And I don't really understand the whole aspect of business and how it worked back then. But this seems to me like he's setting Herbert up with a good position, and he's doing it not for credit, but maybe it's because that's what somebody has done for me, and he is, as I say, paying it forward. And I think this is a good sign for Pip. I think this is good. I loved the dinner scene where they're sitting around, Miss Giffens and Wemmick and the aged parent and Pip are having dinner. And Pip keeps watching Wemmick's arm, slowly reach around Miss Giffen's waist, and then she abruptly puts it back on the table, and then he'll do it again, and then she puts his hand back on the table. And this was racy to Victorians, but Mr. Wemmick, he's trying to put the moves on Miss Giffens, but she's going to remain prim and proper. So after Pip gets things set up for Herbert, and he sees Herbert's joy and his Herbert's joy of having finally gotten into business and having some money, and somebody's giving him money, and he's happy, he's excited about this, and Pip is just moved to tears. Literally, he says, "I did really cry in good earnest when I went to bed, to think that my expectations had done some good to somebody." He did something good with his money. And I think he realized the joy, as the Bible says, that it is better to give than to receive. And Pip understands that now. He's, I think, beginning to. And, I'm so excited for him. I'm really happy for him that he is discovering a good purpose for his money. And that is to help his friend Herbert, whether it's, again, done because of guilt or because of an honest desire to be helpful, maybe a little of both. And let's be honest, maybe that guilt is a bit justified. He realized that he was pulling Herbert into debt after him. Here's how he's going to make it right. But he's doing it anonymously because I'm pretty sure Herbert wouldn't have accepted the money from Pip if he knew that's who it came from. And I thought up to this point, okay, this isn't going to be such a bad ending. But then this little tiny paragraph just kind of, it's got my curiosity piqued now. He said this: "A great event in my life, the turning point of my life, now opens on my view. But before I proceed to narrate it, and before I pass on to all the changes it involved, I must give one chapter to Estella. It is not much to give to the theme that so long filled my heart." So we get two things I think will be cliffhangers. Okay, what's going to happen with Estella, and what is this big turning point event thing that's on the horizon? I have some suspicions, but I'm not sure yet because I can't remember. I can't remember how book 2 ends. But all that aside, I'm really looking forward to next week's reading with you all and chatting about what I'm sure is going to cause much excitement. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of, again, part 22. And this was published on April 27th, 1861. We have some significant things that have happened in these chapters. Mrs. Joe has passed away. Pip has begun to receive be in control of his expectations, his money, and he's setting up Herbert for business, and something big is coming. So some very interesting chapters here. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about what we've read. What do you think about Pip's giving money to Herbert? Do you think it was a good thing? Do you think maybe he was doing it for the wrong motivation? I'd be interested to know what you think there. And anything else you might have picked up on that I didn't talk about, I would definitely love to hear from you. So then next week, we'll be reading chapters 38, which I assume will be about Estella. And then chapter 39, which is going to be perhaps about this big turning point in Pip's life that we don't know what it is. But I expect that we'll start seeing some of our questions answered and some of our answers questioned, right? So until then, thank you so much for joining with me on this reading journey. As always, I have greatly loved reading this book and talking with you about it. It has just made this whole experience so much better. I can't say it enough. Thank you. Thank you. Let me know if you'd be interested in being on a group Zoom call here in a couple weeks when we have our off week. I think I'll plan to do that. Maybe have a time to just do a group chat where we can talk about the portions we all have read. We'll figure it out, but I would love to get a small group of you all together, because I know, like I said, everyone's reading at different rates, but I'd love to just get your thoughts about some of the events that have happened earlier in the book that you've read. So let me know if you'd be interested in that. We'll plan something here for a couple weeks from now. So, and then stay tuned, because Tuesday I'll have another episode out where I'm interviewing an author about memoirs. Her name is Pamela Topjian, and she has written a very powerful memoir of her life. It was a great conversation, and I can't wait to share that with you. That'll be coming out probably on Tuesday. Then I have a ton of booktube videos I want to film and make, but I just have been running out of time to do it. But, between filming this one and the podcast and my other podcast, I've been kind of busy on top of all life stuff happening. But I am just enjoying putting this out. I'm enjoying interacting with you all. So thank you for coming by and listening to and watching the podcast. So that's enough from me today. And remember to do your duty with a strong hand and a gentle heart. Happy reading, and take care.